Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. This is the Music Industry Innovates and Morphs panel. And we're going to be talking about a number of different factors that have implications for where the music industry is headed. I'd like to introduce, well, let me start with introducing myself. I'm Kelly Richards. I'm the president and CEO of a company called the All Access Group. We're a digital media consultancy. I am a 20-year digital entertainment veteran. Started the digital music movement with a couple of other people about 15 years ago. 10 years in charge of music and entertainment at Apple Computer. And I've pioneered a number of interesting disruptive models, business models, and new technologies in the space ever since. I'd like to introduce my esteemed panelists. To my immediate right, Morty Wiggins of 33rd Street Records. I will let each of them say a little something about themselves. Next to Morty, we have Brian O'Neill of Streamcast Networks, in for Mike Weiss. And then Stephen Murray of Burn Lounge. And finally, Dave Jaworski, CEO of Pass Along Networks. Gentlemen, why don't we start with each of you describing yourselves and your company, briefly. Morty, please.
So our company, 33rd Street Records, is a imprint within Bayside Entertainment Distribution, an independent distribution company that distributes CDs and DVDs. We are a company 100% owned by Tower Records. So that puts us in the news these days. And let's see, what else? Another activity that I've started over at within the Tower Corporation is a podcasting site that is called TowerPod.com, and we're producing half-hour music-oriented podcasts, full-length songs, DRM-free, just pure MP3 files, full-length songs that are linked in real time if you choose to stream it off of the website to the Tower.com database for CD purchase and digital purchase as well. So that's.
By the way, I'm going to round out some of these guys if they left out what I think are important parts of their history that you might feel is relevant. Prior to that, Morty was president of A&M Records. Prior to that, he ran Bill Graham. General manager. Prior to that, he was president of Bill Graham Presents.
No, I was the vice president. I was one of the partners.
One of the partners, excuse me. But I knew him 20 years ago when I was in A&R DMI, and he was in the management group at Bill Graham. So he's been in the traditional business as well as digital for quite some time.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Brian.
My name is Brian O'Neill, and I'm currently handling corporate communications and publicity for Streamcast, which is most notoriously known for developing and distributing Morpheus, which is a peer-to-peer file sharing application. And my background before Streamcast was in independent PR, mostly on the content side, publicizing music and television and film projects. And that's most of my background.
Most notably including having ran publicity for the U2 Zoo TV tour, which I think is pretty impressive. Stephen?
It was a great tour.
It was. Hot tongue, baby.
That's right. I'm Stephen Murray, and I am one of the founders and president of entertainment of Burn Lounge, a new digital music service that allows fans to have their own fully functioning digital download store to promote music to their friends, and when they sell it to their friends, they actually get a cut on the transaction. 17-year independent music veteran, kind of done it all. Started out actually as a staff songwriter in a publishing company in Nashville, Tennessee. And the day after I signed that contract, I began the process of trying to dismantle the music industry as we know it, out of sheer frustration. And basically have been on that path doing everything from starting record companies and a couple magazines and all of those things. And had a record company about 4 years ago with Carson Daly. And when we were trying to figure out how to create the street team of the 21st century, we came up with the concept of Burn Lounge, and for the last 3.5 years we've been developing that model, and launched in June, and it's going very well.
Excellent. Dave?
Thank you, Kelly. My background is technology. My degree's in computer science, and at the same time I spent my life, I was passionate about music before I was ever passionate about technology, going back to grade school. And I have a blog. You can see pictures of me with my first Fender Mustang guitar.
Nice.
And all the exciting stuff.
It's true. It's pretty fun to go look at.
Very, very silly hairdos. It was the passion for the artist that led to our developing pass-along networks and really working to create something that connected the content creator, whether that's music, video, or other, and the consumer. And doing technology so well that the technology gets out of the way. So we provide a complete digital media engine for that ecosystem. We're the first to do passing in points, where if I share a song with you and you buy it, I get 10% of that back. So if I just passed you an album through Instant Messenger or through mail and you bought it, I just earned a free song. We were the first to do PayPal for micropayments. We were the first to power all the digital labels, both the majors and the largest independents on eBay, in fact becoming the largest store in the world on eBay in any category. We power the digital brand for Sam Goody stores for Transworld. We power Homemade Simple for Procter & Gamble's site, and we are continuing to grow that system and to power individuals who want to have a store and consumers who want to have a brand that reaches through. So we're B2B to C. We develop all the way through to the consumer, and we have a complete system for people who want to serve digital media to their audience.
Thanks, Dave. So given you can see we have a really strong panel of veterans from both the technology side and the traditional music industry side, as well as the convergence of the two, I'd like to ask each of you guys to briefly share your vision of what you imagine will be most pivotal for artists and consumers over the next year to 18 months with regard to new forms of music distribution and consumption. Anybody jump in? Whoever wants to start.
Well, it's going to probably sound very, very elemental, but one of the biggest issues that I think most of us on the panel are dealing with in one form or another is just the overwhelming amount of content that's available now. And one of the issues that has always been present and I think will never change is how good is that content. And you know, with the threshold to publishing really almost disappearing, and the ability for artists to create their own content and their own albums, their own CDs, it seems to be the overwhelming issue is the amount of content that's available, the amount and how it translates in my world. We were just talking about this a little earlier. Was the friction and the stress in trying to get content and getting product onto the shelves of retail, of physical retail. Just from my point of view, so moving forward, one of the big issues that I'm dealing with, which I mean, you know, doesn't really translate literally in a digital sense, but is very real in my world, and I think there is a correlation there. Is trying to get good stuff out in front of people, and that's probably the biggest issue that I'm dealing with. How to keep records on the shelf. Mm-hmm. You know, when I ship a record to a retailer, the bill is due in 90 days, and if it's not selling, it comes back. You know, it's I'm sure there are related issues I know digitally as well. You know, how do you keep something in front of someone's attention span? You know, someone's attention long enough for them to become familiar with it to want to buy it. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's really a big issue. Is that you know in the enthusiasm for digital distribution and the ability for people to publish digitally, oftentimes we're forgetting about the fact that you know what we're publishing still has to be great for people to want, and you still have to get it in front of people, that's probably that's going to be a bigger and bigger issue, because whether it's the cost of touring or the price of tickets or the availability of shelf space for a physical good, or you know the issues that are you know that are affected digitally in this regard. You know that's going to be the big issue is how good is your stuff, and then how are you going to get it in front of people, and for you know for what kind of sustained effort.
Yeah.
And in what formats, of course, with which that's a whole other piece.
I think artists at one time used to think, how do I get my record on a shelf in Tower? And now with the empowering tools that the internet gives to a musician, I think along with it comes a certain need to learn more about what they can do as an artist to get to the point where Tower will come to them and say, okay, hey, we want your record on our shelves. there's an opportunity to do that.
And of course, it goes beyond just on the traditional retail shelves now, which was a former limitation.
And before, you used to have to go to Tower to find what's new. Now you can use Burn Lounge or Pass Along and learn from your friends what their playlists are, and you can achieve a certain amount of success just that way before you even get to Tower yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when we first conceived of Burn Lounge, and I'm sure, Dave, you guys experienced a similar sort of epiphany in that what we set about to do was not ultimately to change the way music is made. It was not even really to change the way music was distributed. There were others who were sort of, taking the lead on that. What we identified was the key, as Morty, you alluded to, was changing the way music is marketed. And we opted to create a system that does that by making marketing more granular, more democratized, and putting the promotion of music back into that model that we have known works effectively in the music industry for decades, which is the personal referral. I mean, there's nothing more powerful in a marketing plan than we want to go out there and try and get friends to tell friends about this record. But ultimately, the difficulty there has always been, in my career anyway, is how do you motivate it, monetize it, and quantify it? How do you motivate it? How do you keep them going? In the music business, we've used street teams for years, but you motivate them by giving them a T-shirt or a hat. That's only going to last for so long before they're kind of like, all right, I'm kind of looking for another T-shirt, guys. And then how do you monetize it? I mean, how do you with motivating comes a need to monetize that process and monetize that transaction. But ultimately, the biggest piece of the puzzle that I think has been solved with the solutions that companies like Dave's and ours have done is we are able to quantify it. We're able to track the effectiveness of a personal referral, because that personal referral leads to the download, and it happens in that very granular, small, community-based environment. And we're able to connect the dots. That person recommended this record. That person bought it. Therefore, we can commission the people who are out in the business of promoting those records.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So just to agree with what's been said, when we did Mark Knopfler, the former frontman for Dire Straits World Tour, we had 14 dates from the same tour. There's no way Tower is going to give 14 of the same concert, different cities, any shelf space, if you're lucky to get one on. Now, Mark is good enough that he'll get one, but he won't get 14. We had that available to the fans, and Mark doesn't want to promote from the microphone, and in fact decided not to do any promotion. So the only way people could find out was through the passing system, virally, and we saw our largest passing rate that we've seen to this date, which was 80% passing on sales. So it was being passed very, very actively, and continued to sell well 6-7 months after the tour ended, as these Knopfler fans kept discovering, this is out here, and it's great, and you'll enjoy it, and so sharing that. And to your question, Kelly, about what else is going to change in 18 months, I think the biggest change we're looking at is probably on our hips already. We've seen Apple sell 50 million iPods in 4 years, roughly. Every year, there are 800 million to 1 billion cell phones changed out. There are only, they change out every 2 years, so there's about 2 billion cell phones almost. If you go back 6 to 9 months ago, 5% of these could play a stereo music file and give the user a good experience. In the next 18 months, that will be 95%. That's going to change how people consume their music in a new way. And so making it easy is really important. A little silly example, I just changed out my wife and my 3 daughters' phones and got them one that the Verizon person said plays MP3 files. And I thought, this is great. And I bought them all micro SD cards. This is SD in my phone. And said, just throw your music on it, pop it in your phone. It'll be great. You've got headphones. You've now got a great player. It doesn't play MP3 files. The phone actually plays unprotected WMA files. All of our files on our system are MP3 files. And so that creates a hurdle. And they're like, okay, Dad, how do I code it from that that format to this format so it'll play on my phone. And I said, well, here's one of the ways you can do this. And I explained the process, and the two daughters I was talking to at the time, Jennifer and Sarah, said, that's too much work. And these are kids who have taken great painful lengths to figure out how to IM with 15 of their friends while they watch TV and play games on their Nintendo DS and do their homework at the same time. And I would have challenged that, but they got good marks, so I couldn't. So I think we need, as an industry, to really step up and solve some of these interoperability issues that are holding back digital. Today, when I buy a CD, it plays in my car, it plays on my PC, it plays at my office, it plays at my home. I buy that digital file, and one little hurdle, like trying to move it onto my phone, is blocked, and I have to go through tech hurdles, extra steps, and it's not easy. I think that those are the kinds of things we're going to see happening in the next 18 months. We're going to blow through some of the hurdles that have been holding us back, and I think that's exciting for people who want to use this technology.
And just to add to that too, I mean, obviously what you're talking about, you know, is the whole DRM issue, digital rights management, and you know, I mean, it's a frustration, even as a person, as a a content owner and a label owner. It's definitely frustrating because ultimately we're dealing with a technology that there's always something wrong when a technological solution that is designed to limit illegal use also limits legal use.
Right.
And therefore it's very much an inferior product, yet it is sort of what we are all locked into at the moment. Certainly, as you know, working with the labels and the things that they require of us. As far as protecting their files. So I completely agree with Dave. I think that the real innovation that will occur in, I hope, the next 18 months, but I know I've been saying that on panels for about 3 years. So, but would be that sort of interoperability and something that that works on. I don't even necessarily want to say multiple devices. Let's just say multiple platforms.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the reality is, Apple's sold 50 million iPods, but they've sold them to about 8 million people. I know I've had 6.
Right.
Because the damn
4.
things keep breaking. But or the battery stops working or whatever. I mean, whatever it is.
Yep.
The key is that we have a much larger marketplace that is not yet adopting the technology. Not to keep talking about my own company, because that's not what we're here to talk about. But one of the most amazing statistics that we have discovered among the people who have signed up and purchased a Burn Lounge, we call them retailers. Among our retailers, 89% of them had never downloaded a song in their lives until they bought their own Burn Lounge, and 80% of their customers never had. So, while the marketplace is out there kind of, fighting over the 6% of music sales that are digital these days, it's the services and it's the technologies and it's the processes that are going after that other 94% that are really going to kind of dominate, I think, the next year and a half, the next 2 years.
And I hope it won't take 18 months there, because we've had a technology that we've been working on for several years now that is going live in the next couple months. We have a $100 million record label that is distributed by one of the majors that is going out with our Freedom platform. And Freedom lets you distribute MP3s and maintain rights around them with no watermarking. We don't touch the file, we don't DRM wrap the file, we live outside the file and we watch the file going by, recognize it, and then apply a set of rules. And if we haven't worked with the people who own it and they have no say about it, it just goes like it normally would. But if somebody said, I want to give the consumer a choice and give them either a DRM wrap file that has whatever limits each DRM system has, or I'll give them an MP3 file and just ask them not to upload it to XYZ site or another, or not to send it through IM. We can do that, and we can enable them to sell MP3s, which will now mean they can sync it to their iPod, put it on their Creative Zen, stick it on their phone, and make that easier. And then behind the scenes, we could even do the transcoding. So we could get it to work on that phone that takes an unprotected WMA file, and the user would never know it happened, never know that any of that was going on behind the scenes.
Do you think the MP3 format is eroding as far as its adoption and usage, or is it growing?
I think it's growing, and I think that other formats are growing as well. What we're seeing is all digital formats are growing right now, and what's eroding is physical formats, and that is obviously a challenge to retailers. And we work with retailers to figure out how to devise ways to attract the consumer into retail to get something unique, and how to send them out. So this is a CoverGirl makeup card for free music, and it's given out at a retail store. You have to go into retail and participate in a CoverGirl promotion, and then you have a way to get music. We just did one to get people to give blood with American Red Cross. Give blood, and I give, they give you back free songs. And so there are many ways to create healthy cycles between online and offline. And so when we work with any of our customers, it's what are you trying to accomplish? So one retailer said, subscriptions is a bad model for me because it means the consumer comes and they never come back. I need a model that creates a cycle, that's a positive cycle where I can have in-store promotions, online promotions, and keep that relationship building with that consumer. So we work to try and see what each company's needs are and deliver those needs. American Red Cross simply wanted a way to get this generation to start giving blood. And they said music is the thing that'll get them in the door, so let's give them music if they come and give us blood. So it varies by customer as to what they're trying to do.
Yeah, this panel topic and the people we've got assembled here could talk literally all day about all manner of topics. I've got at least a dozen really, really strong questions I'd like to put into play, and I know we're not going to get to all of them. I'm going to pick and choose what I think is going to be most relevant for you guys, but if anybody in the audience has a burning question that I really want you to come away with some value, so don't wait till the end. If you really need to ask something that pertains to the topic, please just raise your hand, let us know. I'm going to jump into my one primary label question, and I'm going to go a little more artist-centric because I'm very artist-centric by nature, even though I come from a label background. In the spirit of what we just did, I'd like to hear from each of you kind of your vision for what a record label looks like over the next 5 years. How will the majors morph to survive in a world where in 5 years they've gone from $40 billion to $32 billion? And do you foresee them taking more pieces of artist revenue streams or attempting to, much like the Korn-Robbie Williams deals? Or do you see artist managers becoming the new record label in terms of balance of power and locus of control? And by the way, for those of you who don't know about the Korn and Robbie Williams deals, these are deals that were done with 2 EMI artists where they were essentially paid $50 million each for the artist management companies were for the label to participate in all revenues. Normally the labels do not participate in merch and touring and other facets, and this buys them a way into that world. So that's the genesis of the question.
I'd like to hear Morty's answer.
I don't think labels are going to jump into the Robbie Williams deals because it's one of those things that looks good on paper but is really, really difficult to administer. You know, as a artist manager, I know that I always tried to segregate as much as I could different aspects of my clients' careers, and so the record company is dependent on reporting and administration that's out of their control, and the systems that the record companies have to administer copyrights and sales and publishing and licensing don't match up at all with taking, you know, miscellaneous income in from touring. I mean, it's so, you know, I'm surprised they actually did 2 of them. I'm not surprised that they didn't do any more than 2 of them because I think they're really hard to administer. They're really hard to monitor.
Morty, so then would you agree with my assumption that we're going to see a shift of balance with
Yeah,
artists and
I think you're going to see more and more managers working with companies like what we have, what Kevin Day's done with Rocket Science. You're going to see more and more managers and artists because they can produce their own records with a $35,000 investment in Pro Tools. You're going to see more and more artists retaining ownership of their own copyrights and looking for companies that are, you know, either marketing distribution companies or marketing companies that have distribution deals to market and promote and release their records.
And so the labels will, in that assumption, really do become more of a marketing and distribution arm, period.
Well, and a licensing arm. You know, I think that, you know, I think that the licensing that's going on at the major labels now, I think, is a real positive move because look, you know, I mean, all the, you know, the major labels are all publicly traded corporations, so, you know, they're not going to let, you know, they're not going to let their revenues slip dramatically. They're not going to make a major, like, move investment into a new format or new delivery that's going to erode the bottom line too significantly. So I really look at the licensing that's going on as a really key transitionary bridge activity for the major labels, because it allows them to still exploit the heart of their business, which is owning copyrights. A major label isn't worth anything without a catalog or without owning. That's the asset base. So
That's the historical.
well, even to this day, I mean, think about it. If a major label doesn't own the copyright, then they don't have any licensing business either. I mean, they're really, a label like the one that we've started for Tower Records on 33rd Street isn't worth anything. I mean, it's a collection of relatively short-term licenses. So, there's nothing there to base a stock price on, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the licensing thing is a really important thing. I think the major labels moving forward, record companies moving forward, will be, yes, marketing and promotion driven, licensing driven, and the major labels are going to have to get used to giving up a piece of the copyright and not owning copyrights in their entirety. That's a big adjustment.
Artists get reversion clauses built in more readily.
I'm seeing that more and more in clients that I'm talking to, and that I'm helping cut deals now in our circumstance. But that more and more of the major labels are willing to entertain a joint venture, and even a licensing deal if the artist is big enough, certainly.
I just to add to that, I mean, I definitely agree. We're certainly seeing a lot of that happening. I mean, look, historically, as Morty said, you need a record company for three things: production of the album. Well, no, not anymore. You can do it in your basement. Manufacturing and distribution. Well, now it's all ones and zeros. And so ultimately, the last thing is marketing, and that's, again, what we tried to build was a marketing solution for the industry. I mean, it was built to be a marketing solution for my label, and then we realized it was a marketing solution for all labels. But the key there, I sort of just, if I can look and be a bit of a futurist for a moment, I actually think that the record companies that are going to really do some dramatically innovative things are the ones who are actually not looking to make money on the sale of the product. They're looking to make money on the usage of the product and come up with new and creative ways to benefit from the publishing rights and the performance rights royalties and all of those things that can really that really benefit the sale of the record. I mean, that's it's ultimately what we always tried to do is promotion, but that's actually now a revenue generating model as well. And I'm a firm believer in artists should own their records and should be in the business of figuring out how to sell those records, and record companies can help by creating revenue generating promotions.
Right.
Being creative is really important. I think you'll have to see the record labels move towards new creative ideas and how they market the acts that they have. It used to be pop radio, MTV.
It was very formulaic.
That was how you got discovered, on the radio or on MTV. Now there's so many more ways to find an audience, and it's a lot different. Record labels aren't going to go away. The CD's not going to go away. I think for years we were talking about in the camera industry how film is going to be gone. Film is going to be gone. They talked about it for years, and now all of a sudden everybody really does have a digital camera, and the film is gone. But it took a while, and there's still a need for the traditional use of film, and just like MTV and pop radio are going to play their role. But I think being creative is going to be important for the labels, especially in the area of marketing.
Agreed.
It's interesting. We saw a period of incredible exploration and discovery with people trying things leading up to the 2001 .com bust. And in many ways, if you said in 2000, predict what it's going to be like 5 years from now, the right answer would have been it'll be less creative than it is today, which we literally lost a period of innovation there. We had 5 years of almost no innovation, where some of the sites that were out, I mean, today there's social networking communities. Well, we had GeoCities and we had other sites that were doing some pretty wild things, and well, there's going to be blogs and podcasting. Well, we had Mountain Zone doing broadcasts from the top of mountains around the world with satellite phones and video and discovering people frozen in place for 70 plus years and all kinds of cool stuff. And that technology, there were many new business models being tried that actually got put on the shelf when everything kind of went into a freeze and let's reorganize and figure out what's happening. And the thing that I think is most exciting is in the past, probably even in the past 9 months, not going back much before that, we've seen a lot of innovation start to happen again, and it is about marketing. It's about trying to find new ways to reach the consumer. We seem to be caught in a paralysis of, oh, this one thing is causing all of the faults of the industry, or this other thing is causing all the faults. And I think what's emerged is some companies that are trying some very innovative things. Some of them are major labels, some of them are small labels. You look at Terry McBride and Network Management, who do Sarah McLachlan and Bare Naked Ladies and others, and some of the things they've done. They have some of the largest street teams. Used to be a street team was, you know, somewhere between 30 and 800 people. They said, what if the street team is 80,000 people? What does that do to our model? Well, Terry's labels are selling 40% of their music today digitally, where most people are selling 4 to 6%, maybe a little bit more. So the answer is experiment and find the model that works for this group, for this generation. I mean, my kids don't do much email, but they live in IM. And so that's what drove us to say, let's make sure when we're passing that IM is a big part of that. And we need to incorporate text messaging. We need to incorporate all these different ways that these folks are communicating today, that my son is sharing music with his friends. Well, he's sharing it in a chat session on Xbox Live or on his PC, and he's got other friends who are introducing him to other artists. They send him the information, he goes up, buys it, downloads it, and 2 seconds later he's got it. My daughter hears about the new song that's out, and if she buys it within this period of time, pre-launch or right at launch, she gets a PDF file or better still, an interactive flash thing that she gets to keep on her PC that has all kinds of behind-the-scenes clicks, and it's like a treasure trove of things she can get to about the artist, and maybe she even gets a discount on tickets. There's all kinds of new ways of reaching out and being innovative. So I agree, it's about being creative. And the labels, some of the innovation has come from the largest labels. They don't get that credit. They seem to get the bad boy sign all the time, and there are some very innovative things happening out of the majors. And again, there's some independents who are doing some of the most innovative things we've seen in years, and our goal is to really make sure our platform doesn't get in the way of any of that, that it empowers these people, it empowers the artists to create, to go explore, to try these new things. And so that, again, I think finally we've left the 5-year hiatus period, and the next 5 years we're going to see models that we can't even think about. The artist is going to be trying to figure out all the different ways that they can sell their music, not the one way. Which is it the right way? Is it download or is it subscription? No, none of the above. It's going to be all of the above. It's going to be many ways of reaching your audience, and you're going to reach different sections of your audience in different ways.
And Dave, that's a perfect segue to my next point. I'm going to dive into a little bit more artist-centric stuff, use of technology. So given music concerts and artist biography shows have been one of the most desirable choices for consumers in the video-on-demand world, how do you see labels and artists taking fuller advantage of TV? And by that, I mean as a distribution medium, cable TV, video on demand, peer-to-peer videos, TV on PC. You know, do you see mass adoption for artists in that direction? Or I'd like to get your input on from each of you.
I certainly have been seeing that. We are in the midst of finalizing a deal with Rehearsals.com, which has some really compelling content. And the idea is that when you download an album, you actually also get a video clip of the artist or the band rehearsing for their upcoming tour, which obviously you buy the album because you get something else, and that something else leads you to find out, want to go and explore and see that band live. And again, I think this is even in a way attached to the question prior and some of the things that Dave said, and in that what we are finding is there is an intense desire among the artists that we are working with, which are absolutely some of the biggest artists in the world, and they are looking at this idea of bundling content. As and doing it exclusively through us because of unlike the other services that have to pay for exclusivity or do things like that, they're actually bringing those things to us because ultimately it's their fans who are out promoting the record, and they want to give their fans a competitive advantage. They want to be able to give their fans the ability to say, yes, you can get the Justin Timberlake album from iTunes, but if you buy it from me, you get clips of his rehearsals, you get interviews with him, with Carson Daly, you get, you know, all of these things that that come with it, and they want to do that exclusively because they're giving that exclusivity to their fans as a competitive advantage. And I think that really is an indication of where the record labels are going, and the artists are going with that concept of bundling content that not only adds more value to the download, and by the way, it doesn't change the price. The reason why it doesn't change the price is because each one of those has a marketing component to it.
Well, it's all incremental revenue.
Yeah, and obviously, you know, ultimately their goal is to sell the album, because the album sells tickets on tour, and and so on and so on. It creates those opportunities for promotional revenue from licensing and all those various things.
We've seen both. We've actually seen some that don't cost more, and then we've seen packages where you get, it's like buying the box set that comes with some extra goods, and you get a ticket discount, and you get some extra tracks and some B-roll video and other things. Yeah. The other thing that's interesting in this day and age with the cost of distribution, you don't have to plan 8 months in advance. You can pick up a trend as quick as it's happening. You can respond to that trend and say, well, we were going to put out 2 shows, let's put out 14 shows and take advantage of that. Or let's shoot more B-roll, and we can give this one channel exclusive, this channel exclusive, this channel exclusive, because I have multiple sets of B-roll, and the true fan's going to go and eat it all up if they can find it all. It becomes a bit of that hunt as well, and each fan prides himself on being the one that discovered the next Easter egg, and so that becomes viral. And then there are, again, creative ways to engage the fan. One of the most creative ones I've seen recently is snakes on a plane. My daughter showed me this thing where she was able to call up a number. I can't remember if it was a website or a number, but she put in her friend's name, and she's literally on the phone with her friend, and her friend says, just a minute, my other line's ringing, and she answers it, and a minute later she comes back, she goes, I just had the weirdest phone call. That was Samuel Jackson, and he said, Sarah, go see snakes on a plane. And then he started telling her why she should go see snakes on a plane. The only thing that was inserted in that was Sarah. The rest of it was the standard ad, and they recorded every common name they could find. And literally, you could send this message around to your friends virally and have Samuel Jackson call your friends and tell them to buy them.
Samuel Jackson sitting in the recording studio saying, Sarah, Harry, Mary.
And maybe it was a good synthesized version of Samuel, and by the time you realized what was going on, the rest of what you were hearing was Samuel, and your brain did the rest. Right. But that's just a neat way to engage the fan and get them in, and have some fun with it. Creative marketing is fun, it's engaging. TV, I think there's only so much room on broadcast TV. I think some smart things have been done. I have a TiVo box, and I've seen content automatically downloaded on promoting a new release that just showed up on my TiVo, so I went there, and there it was, this extra thing on the menu that was an artist that I probably otherwise might not have listened to, but it was some B-roll, and I checked it out, and it was interesting, and it caused me to take interest and note of that artist. It caught my attention. You've got to find all these different channels. IPTV, or internet-based TV like a YouTube and all the other video that's going on the web, is yet another channel, and it fits great for short form. I don't want to watch a lot of long things personally on this, but short form is pretty cool, and if I can do it cost effectively, then great. So I think the audience, again, the message is all these channels, get creative, use them, figure out which one works for you, measure it, and then tune it up. And the tools are great. Used to be you'd spend a lot of money and you'd guess, what happened, and you wouldn't have direct, if I did this, I got this result. Now you can do something and measure the results within hours and know that's working, this isn't working, this one's taking off, go produce more of them. And I think that's exciting to make us smarter and to help these artists have a living doing what they're gifted with, as opposed to having to learn how to pour better shots at Starbucks because that's their second job, or maybe it's their first job to support their true love, which is they want to have as their first job. Or
a group like Styx or Foreigner having to, selling 50 million copies of their albums, having to play Onion festivals or something in their 50s, which is just a travesty. This is a good segue, Dave. I don't want to monopolize any one person on the panel, but full disclosure, Dave is one of my clients, and we're working on something called Concert of the Future that enables artists, because of new technologies, to engage with their fans more effectively before, during, and after a concert, thereby not only enriching the artist-fan relationship, but enriching their wallets, because they're all incremental revenue opportunities. Is there anything you want to say about that in this topic?
Just again, it's about exploring new marketing opportunities, and we Wi-Fi enabled an arena on Brad Paisley's latest tour. Those of you who are country fans just went, wow, Brad Paisley. Those of you who are not country fans just went, who's Brad Paisley? Brad Paisley sold 6 million copies of his latest album. In any genre, there aren't that many artists selling 6 million copies. Not anymore. So Brad's at the peak of his game, and on this tour that is actually still just wrapping up now, we went several months ago and we made an arena hot. And we shot backstage video, pictures, we did an interview with Brad, we did film during the sound check, we shot the unloading of the gear, and Brad kind of out there and looking a little rougher than he did that evening, just getting ready, you know, after he'd just woken up for his sound check. And we made that all available over Wi-Fi. We worked with the management, with the venue, and we then took that experience and told people, look, if you've got a Wi-Fi device, we're not telling everybody to bring their laptop to the concert, but your phones, more and more phones are Wi-Fi, or you could have used Bluetooth. Now you're getting to even more phones, or you could have used EVDO and Sprint and other things. There's a lot of different high-speed ways to get good content down to people, or even getting them a link if they don't have it so they could at least get it when they got home. But we made that available to them, and the reaction is take a 2-hour experience and turn it into something longer and stickier. So the concert I went to, I now have a personal connection with that artist, and that artist now has either an email or my phone number and a way to then use their tools to market back to me, to connect me to their site, to sell merchandise and other things beyond, to let me know when the next tour is coming through, so maybe I can sell more seats, get a few more dates added to the tour. It was a win-win. Everybody was happy. The artists were happy, the fans were happy. We took that and we showed that at the Polestar conference to 1,500 global tour promoters, venue operators, et cetera, and out of that are more of these Concert of the Future events that are going to be brought to market. So it's just another way to market and use an event that's already happening. People are sitting there, you know, they bought their beverage,
Captive
they bought
audience.
the t-shirt, they're sitting there saying, okay, you know, I had a nice Steely Dan song. Every sound check uses Steely Dan. These guys are too.
Or the Police.
And then what do you do with the rest of that time? We made it engaging and something they could take home with them and share with their friends, and that became viral as well. So again, take that experience and seed it.
So earlier, especially Brian and Morty were talking about the long tail implications for indie labels and artists. I want to kind of shift into that discussion just briefly and give them some airtime. What did you want to say about that, Morty?
Well, I think it's great. I mean, I think that the activity that you're describing is great. You know, the challenge that I see in this time that we're in right now is that, you know, it's great with Brad Paisley. You know, I mean, it's great when you have an artist that sold 6 million units. And you know, the challenge that we're in right now is that you know, I look at digital media and digital marketing and digital publishing and distribution as being horizontal. I look at Brad Paisley as being vertical. And they're different businesses. They're completely different businesses. And I think that's the real challenge, is that, you know, all the long tail activity works really, really well when you have an artist that's, you know, that's vertically inclined. You know, when you're a technology company, you know, and your business model works for, you know, many people using it, regardless of the volume.
Yep.
You know, I mean, it works just as well if 50 million people have one fan,
right,
or one person has 50 million fans.
Absolutely.
Works, you know, it works just as well. You know, the challenge for for getting popular content into that model from a vertical standpoint to a horizontal standpoint is, well, who makes it vertical? You know, I mean, because certain things will work in this new world horizontally, and then other things just won't even. It's NA. It's not applicable. There's no fan base. There's no long tail to it. There's no body to attach the long tail to. There's just a dot. You know, and so that's the big challenge that we have. Really, is that, you know, traditionally to get to 6 million units, you're still talking about things where you know, you have that's like, you know, everyone in Manhattan trying to get through the Holland Tunnel at the same time. You know, you're still talking about MTV, you're still talking about radio, you're still talking about things that, you know, we all wish would change and loosen up and be more encompassing, or that something, you know, within the digital marketing world would replace that. And there's certainly things that are making a huge impact that are coming out now. But, you know, we're still in a place where we're talking about horizontal businesses and vertical businesses, and they're two different businesses.
I totally agree. And while that example was a great one for the Brad Paisleys and those who are doing those venues, On Tour is an example of the Longtail app that does touch that little fan that plays at 12th and Lindsley or you know, the Exit Inn in Nashville. And people have been to Nashville say, I had never heard of the Exit Inn. Well, exactly, because, you know, Brad Paisley isn't playing at the Exit Inn. You might only go to the Gaylord Entertainment Center and the Starwood Amphitheater, and that's it for your concert experience. And so On Tour is a free program. You can download it at ontour.net, and it will soon be available in other forms. Sneak peek, exciting stuff. And it's free. It looks at your music collection. So it's your artists. It's whatever artists are on your site, every indie you've ever thought of. It compares the artists you have in your collection against the entire touring database from Polestar, Ticketmaster, and many independent sources, and then tells you when the artists you have are coming to town. So the idea is you're never going to miss a concert again from any artist that you have that's tracked through any of those sources. And as a result, the only negative feedback we had when we beta tested it was people were saying, I've had to buy 2 concerts because these artists were coming. I had no idea they were playing here. You know, band I liked 20 years ago that's playing this little club, or the little the group that never gets the newspaper ad, and our guys, you know, my daughters aren't reading any newspapers, so they're not even seeing the newspaper ads. They're not getting the web ad. They're not getting anything. But this literally was like looking through the needle, the haystack to find the needle that was the one that they cared about. It was their artists against that whole database and making it relevant to them. So that's an example of a horizontal technology.
You know, the other, just to round out this thought too, that the last topic, just about, you know, how a record companies, you know, record companies need to be more creative, or need to get back to being creative. And, you know, the thing that record companies really need to focus their creativity on is making great music.
Absolutely.
And, you know, at there's a reason that I'm bringing this up. You know, record companies used to invest a lot in the A&R process. And that investment and the batting average that most record companies had, you know, organically led to the model that most major record companies operate under, which is, you know, that a small percentage of records pay for a bunch that don't. So, you know, once again, getting back to the challenge between, you know, this, you know, the shifting in our business and horizontal versus vertical businesses, you know, investing in creativity, the record companies have to invest really creatively into making better records, making great records. Everyone agrees on that. That's an expensive process. And because no one bats 1,000, no one bats 500. If you're batting 250, you're having a phenomenal year. So, you know, that's a big rub, because, you know, when you're investing that much, if you're investing more creatively in the A&R process and discovering your own talent, nurturing it, making records, you're going to depend on a vertical business to recoup that, because it's not going to work to invest that money over, you know, because you can't make that many records and sell one copy of each. You know, you really need to depend on that vertical aspect of the business, and that's part of the challenge and the rub here too.
Well, one caveat that I would throw to that, though, is you know, one of the things I used to always say to young artists whenever, you know, they would ask for advice, or they would come to me about getting their record out or getting a record deal, was, you know, the best way to get a record deal is to not need one. Right. And ultimately, you know, it is the people who are out there, because, I mean, you know, for an industry that literally makes its decisions based on just kind of gut, it is ironic, I find, that it is the most risk-averse business that you will ever be involved in. I mean, labels are horrified. They're scared to actually take big risks. And I heard an amazing statistic, and this is true for both music and film. If you took the amount of money that was invested in producing music and promoting and marketing music last year, or the amount of money that was spent creating films and marketing and distributed them, and put them into a money market account, it would have yielded a higher rate of return.
Well, you know, you look at timelines when you make that observation, because of course in the 60s, 70s, and even maybe in the early 80s, labels were much less risk-averse and very artist-centric.
Absolutely.
And then there was that shift.
And substantially more profitable on more records. When I started my first label in 1991, if we sold 25,000 copies of something, we were going to Red Lobster. I mean, we were having a great time. My last label, that same mathematical equation came out to 250,000, and it was still Red Lobster, by the way. It wasn't Mastro's or anything. I mean, you know, I mean, the math doesn't make the sense. The top 1% funds the remaining 99% of
it's like
an artist's
investment banking.
roster. Yeah, it's a very, very difficult model. So while I hear what you're saying, I think that the trends that are happening, what I'm seeing is that artists are developing themselves more effectively.
Absolutely.
And that they are this lowering of cost in producing records and the zero cost of distributing them is making that process more attainable to more artists, and you know, by simply providing solutions to allow them to market, such as Pass Along or you know, Burn Lounge, where the idea is the artist can actually engage the fans that they do have to be in the business of promoting them to their friends.
Correct.
And on and on and on, and creating the model we call concentric retail, where, you know, one sphere of influence leads to
the viral
others.
effect, yeah.
And you know, again, and motivating that, incenting that by cutting the people in on the deal. These fans are now in business with their favorite artists,
Correct.
as opposed to simply, you know, passive fans. And instead of being part of just a social network, they're an empowered social network that's in the business of, they're actually in the business of selling records.
Absolutely.
It's the perfect,
So-
it's the perfect storm for an independent artist.
Absolutely.
You have so many tools, and this concept of vertical versus horizontal is so empowering for an individual artist, because if I'm a skate punk band from Orange County, I can go ahead and make some video, and I can put it up on Rever or YouTube, and I can tag it with a bunch of cool, you know, skate lingo, and people who are searching for that can find me.
You bet.
And all of a sudden I have this like vertical skate punk band that you know, before it was never going to get played on radio. There was one MTV station.
There was one funnel.
Yeah, and,
Either
and
made
we
it in
grew
or
up
you didn't.
we grew up watching one MTV station,
Right.
and even back then there were artists that were hesitant to get into that sort of vertical category, like, oh, I don't want to make a music video because that's going to, you know, somehow.
They didn't want to feel like they were selling out.
Yeah. I mean, there's even still artists today that don't embrace an MP3 because the sound quality isn't as good as they would like it to be. But, you know, get over it. It's a way to build a vertical.
Exactly.
Well, and now I think that what the record companies, we were talking about, you know, how the record companies are going to have to change. I mean, record companies traditionally were in the business of trying to take artists from zero to break even. You know, and that number, that break-even number, is getting higher and higher and higher, to the point where now a major label release won't break even unless it goes platinum.
Right.
Now record companies have the opportunity to be in the business of taking an artist from gold already, before they even start working with them, to platinum, using some of the more vertical, you know, traditional means of promotion, because the artist and their management and their fans have made a marketplace for that music, using the, you know, even, I hate to even call them non-traditional means, but,
Right.
you know, because it's a personal referral and friends telling friends
By
about
the way,
music has
for-
always existed.
For
but-
those who don't know the lingo, so gold translates to 500,000 sales, platinum 1 million, diamond 10 million. So that's what that means. This has been a fantastic panel, and we've got to start to wind down because I'm getting the high sign, but I'd like to entertain a couple of questions from the audience if we have any before we wind up. Anybody have any questions? Please, go ahead.
Panel's opinion on the secondary ticket market and industry as it relates to the overall music and concert scene, because it's getting out of control. I mean, I'm hearing about these, it's 4.5, 5 million, now projected to be a $10 billion industry in the next 4 years. And part of it has to do with all these digital media issues. And it all relates to the musicians and, of course, labels and concerts. People are going out, and that's where they make a lot of their money. Correct me if I'm wrong, when the bands are out to do the concerts.
That's correct. Guys, any thoughts?
Only one of us worked for Bill Graham, so I think we should probably. Yeah.
So the question was
I'm not
about
exactly clear what the question
Yeah,
is.
I'd like your opinion about that area of the industry.
secondary ticket market. Nice way to put it.
Boy, okay. I mean, I have a very dear, close friend that's the queen of that business, and it's and you're right. It's a significant business, and you know, I mean, in some respects, you know, it's just a physical representation of what we're talking about on the long tail in terms of like added value. I mean, what are they doing? I mean, they're adding value to the experience of going and seeing a show. And it's not just, you know, they're not just scalpers, you know, anymore. I mean, you're talking about packaged, like you're talking, I mean, it's fan clubs, you know, it's Golden Circle seating, it's fan clubs, and it's just the physical, I mean, I guess the best way to look at it is like a physical manifestation of, you know, a long tail experience, you know. I mean, it's adding value to the people who can afford it. Now, you know, I worked for a guy who was probably considered the premier concert promoter, entrepreneur of the world, and he hated it. He absolutely hated it. And he fought with every band to make sure the first 10 rows got sold to the public.
Yeah, and this is what we're, yeah.
Amazing extremes when a show went on sale that he knew was hot to make sure there weren't, that a scalper that sent, 50 kids in line, wasn't going to screw some real fan out of, the chance of getting a, seat in the first 10 rows.
Well, as you say, now there's this whole business built up around $450 a pop, and I
Yeah.
get to go before the show and meet the band or whatever. I mean,
Yeah,
that's what we're talking about.
I mean, I don't know, on the one hand, I could totally see where Bill Graham was coming from, that, if you're going to sell, if you're going to sell value added, try and, not, screw the real devoted fan, because you're just screwing yourself at the end. I guess I can analogize that to record companies cutting out singles. What a bad move. That's how kids got introduced to music. You just took it away. So, when you take away the first 10 rows and a fan knows he's never going to get it, that's bad. So there's probably smart things that should be done about fan clubs and secondary tickets as you're describing them. But I don't see it. I don't see it going away. I don't see it necessarily being a negative if it's handled correctly. I see it as a value added.
And I would add to that. We took kind of a unique approach. We just announced on Monday a deal we did with Live Nation, where all Live Nation venues are Burn Lounge VIP venues, and if you are a Burn Lounge VIP retailer, you get your own line that you go through, and you get, if it's in one of their amphitheaters, you get to go in and pick your spot before the venue opens, and you have air-conditioned bathrooms in your own bar. And again, the approach that we took with that was to again, these are retailers. They want to, it's crowdsourcing, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about. We're taking enthusiasts and giving them the ability to be professionals. And what that part of that vibe is that VIP access. It's the our marketing messaging right now is music stores up, buying for the people. But the first messaging was get in. It was about getting into the music business and being part of that process. So ultimately, and the reason why artists are supporting that and doing that again is because these are the retailers. These are the people who are in the business of out there promoting their records. And one of the things that we have done with some of the artists we're working with on their upcoming tours is that our system gives these individual retailers the ability to download a tour poster. The same tour poster that has, instead of the white box at the bottom where they write in with a Sharpie where the band's going to play, it's actually designed and printed for their market. And our retailers are actually buying professionally printed copies through Sir Speedy of these professionally printed posters. And the reason why is because our system automatically puts their URL at the bottom of it to sell the record. So they're actually going out and promoting the tour in order to sell the record through their site, and Live Nation's working on that, as well as the the producers or the booking agents and the management of those events, and in a way that secondary ticketing market, and there's two sides to that. There's the facilitated scalping side of it, which is a completely different thing, and ultimately it's kind of peer-to-peer for tickets, which I think is again, just because it's effective doesn't necessarily mean it's the right approach. But the idea of bundling, again, of creating value, in our case, the value is inherent with the business model that we have, which is if you're a VIP retailer, you get access. But for those who want to just buy access to something cool, I don't know. As long as the artist is cut in on that, I'm all for it.
Yeah, the artist has to have a certain buy-in. Otherwise, you're going to get an artist who is going to want to complain. You're going to get a
Sebastian Bach.
Yeah, or even Bono recently was not happy with Hillary Clinton selling fundraiser tickets to a U2 show,
exactly,
and using the name of the artist to sell that.
In every secondary ticket situation that I think that you're describing, they're artist-driven. I mean, the artist they don't happen without the artist.
Well, and we're talking again about the verticals. We're talking about those hard-to-get tickets, but what about the other side of the industry, which is all the tickets that go unsold? And so think again about on tour. Yeah, think about On Tour, where we know where the fans of that artist are, and now we can reach them and we can do something to elevate the fact that, hey, there's seats available and we can give you a better rate. I mean, we're coming up to the concert time. We still got all the grass out there at Starwood available. We could do something to put something up that's special for that audience, or make it available to some group and give them a way. So it is a way to help the artist and help the promoter and help all the people, help the ecosystem to do a better job reaching out, where before they'd be like, it's over, we're going to lose money on this show. It's like, no, not necessarily. There are ways to tap the channel and power up the system and do some amazing things. The other thing we've seen done digitally as well that's very exciting is when you do have a hot artist and they decide at the spur of a moment they're going to do something. They're going to take over the Fox just up the way. And Neil Young did that. He announced on one radio station and put out one blast mail to all the people in the area that he was going to do a concert that night. And in 30 minutes or less, it was minutes, it was sold out. So they can decide, hey, I feel inspired today. I'm going to go, is the Fox available? It is. Let's go play and bring our friends along and do something that before in the physical, you just didn't have the opportunity to get the word out quick enough. Radio was good, but not good enough. And the ability to target all the fans in a geography and give them an opportunity that they otherwise would never get gets really exciting. You just got let in on the best secret in town.
Here's an idea. You can send them an SMS message to their cell phone with a barcode that they can just put their cell phone as they walk into the concert, and it'll scan.
Absolutely.
Or Samuel Jackson can call you and say, there's a secret performance tonight of all the bands on my soundtrack.
You know, I just want to bring
It's
up
the last word. We got to wrap it up,
I just want to bring
guys.
up one point about this, which kind of circles around to like the challenges that we talked about facing the industry, et cetera. And that's, and because, what you're describing is a wonderful use of technology, but essentially, if a show is a dog, it's a dog.
Sure. Yeah, it's about good music.
And what you're doing is you're having a real efficient way to paper the house.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I'm talking about in regards to the overwhelming amount of content. And the biggest challenge that we have is that, we have wonderful technologies and there's a lot of hope being put in these technologies, but it's only as good as the content. The show's only as good as it's going to be. If it's a dog, it's a dog.
Yeah.
And
Tower does a ton of in-store performances every year, but those are hardly known to the fans of those artists. So it's a way for you to,
the
this
interesting
becomes
thing
another
too
tool.
is that the average attendance, and most people wouldn't know this, but the average attendance at the Tower in-store, because I get a report on every single one of them, is a dozen people.
Yeah,
and the average
exactly.
unit sold is 6.
Exactly. So the point being, stick that in On Tour, and now all of a sudden, every fan in the entire area knows that that's happening at their Tower store, because unless they happen to have been by, they wouldn't have known. So
I went to the Devo Tower signing in Mountain View when I was 16. On that note,
Changed your
we
life.
got to wrap it up, guys. Please thank the panelists.
Thank you.